The rain hammered against my writing cabin windows like an unwelcome visitor demanding entry. I'd been staring at the same blank page for 3 hours, my latest novel refusing to cooperate. The cursor blinked mockingly at me while I nursed my 4th cup of coffee, wondering why inspiration always seemed to abandon me during Maine's endless gray seasons. My name is Tanner Jossman, and I make my living crafting stories about people who get what they deserve. The irony wasn't lost on me that night, sitting in my isolated cabin behind our Victorian house, completely unaware that my own story was about to take a turn that would make my darkest fiction seem like children's literature. The sound of gravel crunching under tires pulled my attention from the computer screen. Through the rain-streaked window, I watched Mira's Honda Civic creep up our driveway, headlights cutting through the darkness. The dashboard clock read 2:17 a.m. I'd been married to Mira Jossman for 3 years, and she'd never come home this late from one of her university functions. As the PR director for the local college, she attended networking events, faculty meetings, and academic conferences with religious devotion. But those typically ended by midnight at the latest. I watched her sit in the car for several minutes, the engine running, her silhouette illuminated by the interior light. She appeared to be texting someone, her fingers moving rapidly across her phone screen. Finally, she gathered her purse and made a dash for the front door. By the time I made it from the cabin to the house, she was already upstairs. I could hear water running in our bathroom. "Mira?" I called up the stairs. "Just getting ready for bed," came her muffled reply. "Long night with the faculty committee." I climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking under my weight. Our house had character, which was realtor speak for old and noisy. Every footstep, every closing door, every whispered conversation echoed through the rooms, like secrets refusing to stay hidden. She emerged from the bathroom wearing her silk robe, hair damp from what must have been a quick shower. Her makeup was gone, but she still looked flushed, energized in a way that seemed inconsistent with a boring academic meeting. "How was the committee meeting?" I asked, settling onto my side of the bed. "Tedious as always," she said, avoiding eye contact while she rummaged through her dresser drawer. "Professor Brewster had some new initiatives he wanted to discuss. You know how he gets when he has ideas." Dr. Alan Brewster. I knew the name well. He was a tenured literature professor, mid-40s, with the kind of distinguished gray at his temples that made undergraduate students swoon and graduate students compete for his attention. Mira had mentioned him frequently over the past few months, always in the context of work, always with a slight change in her tone that I'd attributed to professional admiration. "Must have been quite the discussion to go until after 2, I said. She paused, a nightgown halfway out of the drawer. "We went for coffee afterward. Time got away from us." "Coffee at 2 in the morning?" "Denny's is open all night, Tanner. We were brainstorming the spring marketing campaign." Her voice carried a note of irritation, as if my questions were unreasonable. "Some of us have jobs that require collaboration outside normal business hours." The comment stung. As a novelist, I worked from home, setting my own schedule and answering to no one but my editor and publisher. Mira had always been supportive of my career, but lately, her comments carried subtle implications that my work wasn't as important or demanding as hers. I let it slide. Marriage, I'd learned, was about picking your battles, and I was too tired for conflict. But as I lay awake listening to her breathing settle into sleep patterns, something nagged at me. The shower, the late hour, the defensive tone when I asked simple questions. Mira was many things, ambitious, social, sometimes scattered, but she'd never been secretive. The next morning brought weak sunshine and the smell of coffee from downstairs. Mira was already dressed for work, standing at the kitchen counter with her phone in one hand and a travel mug in the other. She looked refreshed, energetic, completely recovered from her late night. "Morning," I said, heading for the coffee pot. "Good morning. I need to get to the office early today. The dean wants to review our budget proposals before the board meeting." Her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at the screen and I caught a fleeting smile before she tucked the device into her purse. "Anything important?" I asked. "Just work stuff. Pam confirming our lunch meeting." Pam Cates was Mira's closest friend and colleague, a faculty administrator with a talent for office gossip and an encyclopedic knowledge of university politics. If anyone knew what was really happening in Mira's professional life, it would be Pam. After Mira left, I settled into my writing routine, but concentration eluded me. The conversation from the night before replayed in my mind, each detail feeling more suspicious upon reflection. I'd built a career on understanding human behavior, on recognizing the subtle tells that revealed character motivation. My instincts were telling me something was wrong. Around noon, I decided to take a break and walk to the mailbox. Our neighbor, Mrs. Halloway, was working in her garden despite the chilly weather. She was 70-something, sharp as a tack, and had lived on our street long enough to know everyone's business. "Afternoon, Tanner," she called out, straightening up from her flower bed. "How's the writing going?" "Slow today. You know how it is." She nodded sympathetically. Creative work requires the right mindset. Hard to focus when there's too much activity around the neighborhood. Something in her tone made me pause. "Activity?" "Oh, just the usual comings and goings. Though I have to say, Mira's been keeping some late hours lately. Saw her coming home well after midnight again last night." "Again?" Mrs. Halloway's expression shifted slightly, as if she'd said more than intended. "Well, I'm an insomniac, you know. I notice things. Probably just work keeping her busy." But her eyes suggested she suspected otherwise. That afternoon, I found myself paying closer attention to details I'd previously ignored. Mira's phone, which she'd always left casually around the house, now seemed permanently attached to her hand. Her laptop, once shared freely between us for streaming movies or checking email, was now password protected. When she came home that evening, I was waiting in the living room with a glass of wine and what I hoped was a casual expression. "How was your day?" I asked. "Hectic. The dean approved our budget, but now we have to revise the entire marketing timeline." She set her purse down and headed for the kitchen. "I might need to work late again tomorrow. Professor Brewster wants to review the literature department's promotional materials. Seems like you and Professor Brewster have been collaborating a lot lately." She paused in the doorway, her back to me. "He's the department head, Tanner. Of course we collaborate." "I was just thinking maybe I could meet him sometime. You talk about him so much, he sounds interesting." "Maybe sometime," she said, disappearing into the kitchen. "He's very busy with his research." That night I lay awake long after Mira had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling and trying to convince myself that my suspicions were unfounded. But every rational explanation felt forced. Every benefit of the doubt felt naive. I was a storyteller by profession and by nature. I understood narrative structure, character development, and plot progression. And every instinct I possessed was telling me that my marriage had entered a new chapter, one where I was no longer the protagonist. The next morning, Mira left early again, claiming another meeting with the dean. After her car disappeared down the street, I made a decision that would have seemed unthinkable just days earlier. I was going to investigate my own wife. The university campus buzzed with the energy of a new semester. Students hurried between buildings with backpacks and coffee cups, while faculty members moved with the measured pace of people who'd learned that academic urgency was relative. I parked near the administration building where Mira worked, feeling like a private investigator in one of my own novels. I'd called my childhood friend Dylan Reed that morning, ostensibly to catch up, but really to enlist his help with what I was starting to think of as my reconnaissance mission. Dylan ran a small handyman business and had the kind of practical skills that complemented my more theoretical approach to problem solving. "You want me to do what?" Dylan had asked when I explained my request. "Install a GPS tracker on Mira's car, just temporarily, for insurance purposes." "Insurance purposes, my rear end," Dylan had replied. "But you're my friend, and if you think something's going on, I trust your judgment. Plus, I've always thought Mira was too good to be true. Now, sitting in my car outside the university, I questioned whether I was crossing a line from concerned husband to paranoid stalker. But the doubt lasted only until I spotted Mira's Honda in the faculty parking lot, parked next to a silver Tesla with the license plate Brewster. Dr. Alan Brewster's car. At 10:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, when Mira had claimed to be in budget meetings with the dean. I drove home with my hands gripping the steering wheel and my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe they'd carpooled to an off-campus meeting. Maybe the Tesla belonged to someone else. Maybe I was seeing connections that didn't exist. But when Dylan arrived that afternoon with a small electronic device and a knowing look, I was ready to find out for certain. "This little gadget will tell you everywhere that car goes," Dylan said, attaching the tracker to the underside of Mira's Honda. "Real-time updates to your phone. Just promise me you won't do anything stupid with the information. Define stupid. Anything that ends with you calling me from jail." That evening, Mira announced she'd be working late again. "Professor Brewster wants to finalize the literature department's promotional strategy," she said, gathering her laptop and purse. "Might be a long night." "Want me to bring you dinner?" I offered. "That's sweet, but we'll probably just order something to the office." I watched her drive away, then immediately checked the GPS app on my phone. The red dot representing her car moved through town, but instead of heading to the university, it went directly to Maple Grove Apartments, an upscale complex on the other side of town. According to the faculty directory I'd looked up online, Dr. Alan Brewster lived at 47 Maple Grove Drive, Unit 12B. The red dot stopped moving at 7:23 p.m. I sat in my living room, staring at my phone screen, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. The GPS didn't lie. The timestamps didn't lie. My wife was at her colleague's apartment, and she'd lied to me about where she was going. For the next 3 hours, I watched that red dot remain stationary. I tried to focus on writing, on television, on anything other than imagining what was happening in apartment 12B. But my mind kept returning to the same devastating conclusion. At 11:47 p.m., the red dot began moving again. I tracked Mira's route home, watching her take the long way through downtown, probably to make it seem like she was coming from the university. When she walked through our front door at 12:15 a.m., I was waiting in the living room with a book in my lap, pretending to read. "How was the meeting?" I asked. "Productive. We got a lot accomplished." She looked tired but satisfied, the way someone looks after completing important work. "I'm exhausted, though. Going straight to bed." "Did you get dinner?" "We ordered Chinese. Nothing fancy." Another lie. According to the GPS, she hadn't left Brewster's apartment complex once during those 3 hours. The next morning, I called in sick to my writing routine and drove to Murphy's Tavern, a local bar that served as an unofficial faculty hangout. If I wanted information about university gossip, this was the place to find it. The lunch crowd was thin, a few professors grading papers over beer and sandwiches, some graduate students engaged in intense academic debates, and Pam Cates sitting alone at the bar with a glass of white wine and her phone. Perfect. I ordered a beer and positioned myself 2 stools away from Pam, close enough to overhear her phone conversation, but far enough to seem coincidental. "I'm telling you, Jennifer, it's getting obvious," Pam was saying into her phone. "The way they look at each other during meetings, all those late-night work sessions, everyone's starting to notice." My pulse quickened. I pretended to check my own phone while straining to hear more. "Mira thinks she's being discreet, but please, Alan Brewster has a reputation, and she's just the latest in a long line of younger colleagues who've fallen for his whole distinguished professor routine." I nearly choked on my beer. Pam was talking about Mira and Brewster. She was confirming what I'd suspected, but hoped wasn't true. "The thing is," Pam continued, lowering her voice, "Mira's married to that writer guy, Tanner something. I've met him a few times at university functions. Seems nice enough, but completely clueless about what's going on. Not anymore, I thought grimly. Pam finished her call and was gathering her things when I made my move. Pam? Pam Cates? She looked up, squinting slightly as she tried to place me. Oh, hi. Tanner, right? Mira's husband? That's right. Mind if I buy you another drink? I was hoping to get some advice about a surprise I'm planning for Mira. The word surprise seemed to make her uncomfortable, but she agreed to stay for one more glass of wine. What kind of surprise? She asked carefully. I was thinking about showing up at one of her work events. You know, be the supportive husband, meet her colleagues. She talks about Professor Brewster all the time. Seems like they work closely together. Pam's expression shifted, and I could see her internal struggle between discretion and her natural inclination toward gossip. That's sweet, she said finally. Though you might want to check with Mira first. Academic events can be pretty boring for outsiders. Oh, I don't mind boring. I'm a writer. I find human behavior fascinating, especially workplace dynamics. The relationships people form, the way collaboration can become intimate. The word hung in the air between us. Pam's face flushed slightly. Tanner, It's okay, Pam. I'm not as clueless as people think. She stared at me for a long moment, then finished her wine in one gulp. I should go. Good luck with your surprise. But as she stood to leave, she paused and looked back at me with something that might have been pity. For what it's worth, I think you deserve better. That evening, I confronted Mira directly. I'd spent the afternoon rehearsing the conversation, trying to find the right balance between accusation and inquiry. But when she walked through the door claiming another late meeting with Brewster, my carefully planned approach dissolved into raw emotion. How long has it been going on? I asked. She froze in the doorway, her purse sliding off her shoulder. What? You and Professor Brewster. How long? I don't know what you're talking about. Mira, I know you were at his apartment last night. I know you've been lying about these meetings. I know Pam and half the faculty are gossiping about your relationship. Her face cycled through several expressions: surprise, denial, anger, and finally, resignation. It's not what you think, she said quietly. Then explain it to me. She sat down heavily on our couch, suddenly looking older than her 31 years. Alan understands my work in a way that you never have. He takes my career seriously. He doesn't treat my job like it's less important than his creative pursuits. So this is my fault? It's nobody's fault. It just happened. Affairs don't just happen, Mira. They're choices. A series of choices. She looked up at me with eyes that had become those of a stranger. I want a divorce. The words hit me like cold water. Even though I'd suspected the affair, even though I'd spent days gathering evidence, I wasn't prepared for the finality of that statement. Fine, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded, but don't expect me to make it easy. That night, I called Dylan. She wants a divorce, I told him. I'm sorry, man. That's rough. The thing is, I don't think she understands what she's asking for. She thinks she can just walk away, start over with Professor Brewster, leave me to deal with the wreckage. What are you thinking? I'm thinking it's time for some consequences. I'm thinking Professor Brewster and my wife have been having their fun at my expense, and now it's my turn. Tanner. I'm not talking about anything illegal, Dylan. I'm talking about truth. I'm talking about making sure everyone knows exactly who they're dealing with. Okay. What do you need? Help me document everything. Every lie, every meeting, every text message. If Mira wants to end our marriage for another man, she's going to do it publicly, with full transparency about what kind of people she and Brewster really are. You sure about this? I looked around our living room, at the photos of our wedding, the furniture we'd chosen together, the life we'd built that she was ready to discard for a middle-aged professor with a silver Tesla. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The next morning, I woke up to an empty house and a text message from Mira saying she was staying at Pam's apartment until we figure things out. The message felt like a slap. Casual, dismissive, as if our 3-year marriage was just a minor inconvenience to be sorted out between her real priorities. I made coffee and sat in my writing cabin, staring at the blank document on my computer screen. For the first time in weeks, I knew exactly what story I wanted to tell. Dylan arrived around noon with a box of equipment that looked like something from a spy movie. Voice recorder, hidden camera, phone monitoring software, he said, unpacking devices onto my kitchen table. All perfectly legal for use in your own home, on your own property, with your own wife. You seem to know a lot about surveillance equipment. Let's just say my ex-wife taught me the value of documentation during divorce proceedings. We spent the afternoon setting up recording devices in strategic locations throughout the house. The living room, kitchen, and my home office were all equipped with voice-activated recorders, small enough to hide behind picture frames and under furniture. The key is patience, Dylan explained as he showed me how to operate the equipment. Let them think they're safe, let them get comfortable, and they'll eventually give you everything you need. That evening, Mira returned to collect more of her belongings. I watched from my office window as she parked next to a silver Tesla in our driveway. Professor Brewster had come with her. Apparently, she needed moral support to face her husband. I activated the recording devices and waited. They entered through the front door, Mira's voice carrying clearly through the house. I'll just grab some clothes and my laptop. This won't take long. Take your time, came Brewster's voice, deeper and more refined than I'd expected. I'll wait in the living room. Perfect. I slipped out the back door and circled around to peer through the living room window. Dr. Alan Brewster was exactly what I'd imagined. Tall, distinguished, with graying hair and the kind of casual confidence that came from years of academic authority. He wore a sport coat over dark jeans and moved through my living room like he owned it. From upstairs, I could hear Mira moving around our bedroom, opening drawers and closets. The sound of her packing up our shared life felt surreal, like watching someone dismantle a stage set after the play had ended. This is a nice place, Brewster called up the stairs. Tanner inherited it from his grandmother, Mira replied. The writing cabin was his idea. He thinks isolation makes him more creative. And does it? Hard to say. His latest book isn't exactly flying off the shelves. The casual cruelty of the comment hit me harder than I'd expected. Mira had always claimed to support my writing, to believe in my talent. Hearing her dismiss my work to her lover felt like a betrayal separate from the affair itself. What's he like? Brewster asked. Your husband? There was a long pause before Mira answered. Passive. He's one of those people who thinks life just happens to them instead of taking control. The opposite of you, really. Passive can be dangerous, Brewster said. Passive-aggressive men sometimes surprise you. Tanner's not dangerous. He's just disappointed. In his career, in our marriage, probably in himself. I think part of him is relieved this is over. I recorded every word, my anger building with each casual insult. They were discussing me like I was a minor character in their love story, an obstacle to be managed rather than a person whose life they'd destroyed. When they finally left, I retrieved the recording devices and transferred the audio files to my computer. The conversation was clear, damning, and exactly what I needed to begin building my case. But I wanted more than just evidence of their affair. I wanted to understand the full scope of their deception, to document every lie Mira had told and every boundary they'd crossed. The next day, I drove to the university campus with a specific mission. If Mira and Brewster thought their relationship was an open secret among the faculty, then someone would be willing to talk about it. I found my target in the campus coffee shop, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a psychology professor I'd met at several university functions. She was grading papers at a corner table, red pen in hand, and a look of academic frustration on her face. Dr. Walsh? I'm Tanner Jossman, Mira's husband. We met at the holiday party last year." She looked up, and I saw recognition followed immediately by discomfort. "Oh, hello, Tanner. How are you?" "I've been better. Mind if I sit down? I was hoping to ask you about something." She gestured to the empty chair across from her, but her expression remained wary. "I'm sure you've heard about Mira and Professor Brewster," I said directly. Dr. Walsh's face flushed. "I don't really involve myself in departmental gossip." "I'm not asking for gossip. I'm asking for facts. As her husband, I think I have a right to know how long this has been going on and whether it's affecting their professional responsibilities." She set down her red pen and studied my face carefully. "What exactly do you want to know? When did it start? How obvious has it been? Are there other faculty members who can confirm what's been happening?" Dr. Walsh was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with professional discretion and personal sympathy. "Look, Tanner, I like you. You've always been kind to the faculty spouses, and you don't deserve what's happening. But I can't get involved in your marriage problems." "I'm not asking you to get involved. I'm asking you to tell me the truth about what you've observed in a professional setting." She sighed heavily. "It started last semester. Maybe earlier, but that's when it became noticeable. The way they looked at each other during meetings, the private conferences, the joint travel to academic conferences. Alan has a history with younger colleagues, and Mira, well, she seemed flattered by the attention. Joint travel? The conference in Boston last month, they shared a hotel room. It wasn't exactly subtle." My stomach dropped. Mira had told me she was traveling alone to that conference, had even called me from her hotel room to say goodnight. The depth of the deception was staggering. Is there anyone else who might be willing to confirm what they've observed? You'd have to ask them yourself. But Tanner, be careful how you handle this. Alan Brewster has tenure and influence. If you're thinking about making formal complaints or causing public scenes, you might want to consider the consequences. What kind of consequences? The kind that could affect Mira's career prospects, even after your divorce. The university doesn't like scandals, but they protect their tenured faculty first. I thanked Dr. Walsh and left the coffee shop with a clearer picture of what I was dealing with. This wasn't just an affair. It was an abuse of power, a pattern of behavior, and a professional relationship that had crossed every possible ethical boundary. That evening, I called my attorney. "I need to document an extramarital affair for divorce proceedings," I told him. "What kind of evidence do you have? Audio recordings, witness statements, GPS tracking data, and photographic evidence." "Photographic evidence? I'm working on that part. Tanner, I have to advise you to be very careful about how you gather evidence. Anything obtained illegally can't be used in court and could get you in serious trouble. Everything I'm doing is legal. I'm recording conversations in my own home, tracking a vehicle I co-own, and documenting public behavior." "What about the photographic evidence?" "I'm planning to take pictures in public spaces of public behavior. Nothing invasive, nothing illegal. Just be smart about it. And remember, the goal is to protect your interests in the divorce, not to destroy your wife's life." But as I hung up the phone, I realized that protecting my interests and destroying their comfortable deception might end up being the same thing. Over the next week, I established a routine. Every evening, I parked across from Maple Grove Apartments and waited. The GPS tracker told me when Mira arrived, and my camera documented when she left. I photographed her entering and leaving Brewster's building, captured images of them together in his car, and built a timeline that contradicted every story she'd told me about working late. The most damning evidence came on a Thursday evening when I followed them to Chez Laurent, an upscale French restaurant on the other side of town. I sat at the bar with a clear view of their table and watched them share an intimate dinner that looked nothing like a professional meeting. They held hands across the table. Brewster fed her bites of his dessert. When they left, he had his arm around her waist, and she was laughing at something he'd whispered in her ear. I captured it all on camera. But the real breakthrough came when Mira returned to the house the following Saturday to collect more of her belongings. She thought I was out. I'd made a point of telling her I'd be at Dylan's all day, but I was actually hiding in my writing cabin with a clear view of the house. She wasn't alone. Brewster was with her again, and this time they were more relaxed, more careless. They moved through my house like they owned it, commenting on furniture and belongings with the casual intimacy of people planning a future together. I activated the recording system remotely and listened through wireless headphones as they discussed their plans. Once the divorce is final, we can be more open about our relationship, Brewster was saying. How long do you think it will take? Mira asked. Depends on how reasonable Tanner is about the settlement. If he fights it, things could get messy. He won't fight it. He's too passive to make trouble. Don't underestimate him, Mira. Passive men can become vindictive when they feel betrayed. You don't know Tanner like I do. He'll be hurt, but he'll ultimately do whatever's easiest. That's how he approaches everything. I listened to them plan their future while dismantling my past, and I realized that they had fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. I wasn't passive. I was patient. I wasn't weak. I was strategic. And I wasn't going to make anything easy for them. That night, I began planning their public humiliation. The Autumn Heritage Festival was Millbrook's biggest annual event, drawing hundreds of people to the downtown area for a weekend of local crafts, food vendors, and community entertainment. The festival always featured an open mic stage where local musicians, poets, and storytellers could perform for the crowd. I'd participated twice before, reading excerpts from my novels to polite applause. This year, I had something different planned. You want to do what at the festival? Dylan asked when I explained my strategy. I want to tell a story, a true story about academic ethics, professional misconduct, and the consequences of betrayal. In front of the entire town? In front of everyone who matters. Mira's colleagues, Brewster's students, all the people who've been whispering about their relationship behind closed doors. Dylan shook his head. That's not revenge, man. That's public execution. They made their choices publicly. They held hands in restaurants, attended conferences together, made their affair an open secret among the faculty. I'm just providing some context for their behavior. And you think this will accomplish what exactly? It will accomplish the truth. Right now, they control the narrative. Mira gets to be the unhappy wife who found true love with a distinguished professor. Brewster gets to be the mentor who helped a younger colleague discover her potential. I'm just the passive husband who couldn't keep his wife interested. So you want to rewrite the story. I want to tell the real story, with evidence, with documentation, with all the details they thought would stay private. The festival was still 2 weeks away, which gave me time to prepare my presentation and gather the final pieces of evidence I needed. I spent my days writing what I was starting to think of as my masterpiece, a carefully crafted narrative that laid out the timeline of their affair, the lies they'd told, and the professional boundaries they'd violated. But I wanted more than just my word against theirs. I wanted proof that would be undeniable, documentation that would make their denials impossible. The opportunity came when Mira texted me about collecting the last of her belongings from our house. I'll be there Sunday afternoon while you're at your writing group, she wrote. I'll leave the key when I'm finished. I didn't attend a writing group on Sundays, but I'd mentioned the fictional commitment to establish an alibi for my surveillance activities. Mira's assumption that I'd be gone gave me the perfect opportunity to record her final visit to our home. This time, I positioned myself in the house rather than the cabin. I hid in the basement with a clear audio feed from the recording devices upstairs, waiting to capture whatever conversation she and Brewster might have in what they thought was private space. They arrived at 2:30 p.m., and from the moment they entered, their conversation was more revealing than anything I'd recorded before. I can't believe I lived here for 3 years, Mira said as they climbed the stairs to our bedroom. Everything feels so small, so limiting. It's not the house, Brewster replied. It's the mindset. Tanner's content with mediocrity, so everything around him reflects that. God, you're right. Look at this furniture, these books, even the art on the walls. It's all so safe, so conventional. They were in our bedroom now, and I could hear drawers opening, hangers sliding across closet rods. What about his writing? Brewster asked. Is he actually talented or just persistent? A little of both, I guess. His first book did okay, but the second one barely sold. He keeps talking about his vision and his artistic integrity, but honestly, I think he's just afraid of real success. Afraid of the work it requires? Afraid of the risk. Afraid of putting himself out there and finding out he's not as special as he thinks he is. I listened to them dissect my character and my career with the casual cruelty of people who felt completely safe from consequences. Every word was being recorded, every insult documented for posterity. When did you know the marriage was over? Brewster asked. Honestly? Probably 2 years ago. Maybe longer. I just felt like I was growing and he was staying the same. When I started working with you, the contrast became impossible to ignore. You needed someone who could match your ambition. I needed someone who understood that life is about taking what you want, instead of waiting for it to be offered. Is that what you did with me? Took what you wanted? There was a pause, and when Mira spoke again, her voice had changed, softer, more intimate. I saw what I wanted, and I went after it, just like you taught me. And what did you want? You. This. A real partnership with someone who doesn't just support my dreams but shares them. What about Tanner's dreams? What about them? He's a grown man. He'll figure out his own life. The casual dismissal of our shared future, the complete absence of guilt or regret in her voice. It was exactly what I needed to justify what I was planning. They finished packing and moved downstairs to the living room, where their conversation turned to practical matters. Have you talked to a lawyer yet? Brewster asked. Not yet. I wanted to see how reasonable Tanner would be first. Don't wait too long. The sooner you file, the sooner we can start our real life together. Are you sure you're ready for that? For us to be public? Mira, I've been ready since our first conference together. You're the one who's been worried about appearances. I just don't want people to think I left my husband for my boss. You didn't leave your husband for your boss. You left your husband for me. There's a difference. Is there? Of course there is. What we have isn't about power or position. It's about connection, about finding someone who understands your potential. I almost laughed out loud at the rationalization. Brewster was rewriting their affair as a love story, erasing the professional misconduct and ethical violations with romantic rhetoric. After they left, I transferred the recordings to my computer and added them to my growing collection of evidence. I had everything I needed now: audio proof of their affair, photographic documentation of their public behavior, witness statements from faculty members, and GPS data that contradicted every story Mira had told me. But more than evidence, I had insight into how they saw themselves and how they saw me. They thought I was passive, conventional, afraid of risk. They thought I would handle our divorce quietly, privately, with the same mediocrity they attributed to the rest of my life. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The week before the festival, I made my final preparations. I created a multimedia presentation that combined audio clips, photographs, and timeline documentation into a comprehensive narrative of their affair. I practiced my delivery until I could tell the story smoothly, professionally, with the kind of compelling detail that would hold an audience's attention. I also took one last precaution. I sent copies of all my evidence to a lawyer, to Dylan, and to a safety deposit box at my bank. If Mira and Brewster tried to retaliate legally, I wanted to ensure that the truth would survive any attempts to suppress it. On the morning of the festival, I woke up feeling calmer than I had in weeks. The uncertainty was over, the investigation complete. All that remained was the revelation. I dressed carefully, not formal enough to seem overdressed for a community event, but professional enough to command respect when I took the stage. I loaded my presentation onto a laptop and backup drive, checked my notes one final time, and drove downtown to end my marriage in front of everyone who mattered. The festival was already crowded when I arrived, families with children wandering between craft booths and food trucks. The open mic stage was set up in the town square with a decent sound system and a small crowd of people waiting for the entertainment to begin. I spotted several familiar faces in the crowd: university faculty members, local business owners, neighbors from my street. Perfect. The audience was exactly what I'd hoped for. I also spotted Mira and Brewster near the coffee vendor, standing close together and scanning the crowd like they owned the place. Mira was wearing a sundress I'd bought her for our anniversary, and Brewster had his hand possessively on her lower back. They looked happy, confident, completely unprepared for what was about to happen. I signed up for a speaking slot and waited for my turn, watching them enjoy what would be their last public appearance as a secret couple. When the organizer called my name, I walked to the stage with my laptop and connected it to the sound system. The crowd quieted as I adjusted the microphone and looked out over the assembled faces. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jossman, and I'd like to tell you a story about truth, consequences, and the importance of accountability in our community. I saw Mira's face go pale as she realized what was happening. Brewster looked confused, not yet understanding the danger he was in. This is a story about two people who thought they could rewrite the rules of professional ethics, marriage vows, and basic human decency without consequences. It's a story about lies, manipulation, and the abuse of power in our local university. Mira was pushing through the crowd now, trying to reach the stage, but Dylan appeared beside her, blocking her path with a friendly smile and a firm hand on her arm. And it's a story that I can prove with evidence, with recordings, and with documentation that will leave no doubt about who these people really are. I clicked to my first slide, a photograph of Mira and Brewster holding hands at Chez Laurent. Let me introduce you to my wife, Mira Jossman, and her lover, Professor Alan Brewster. The crowd erupted in murmurs and gasps. Several people turned to stare at Mira, who had stopped trying to reach the stage and was now looking around desperately for an escape route. Over the next 10 minutes, I'm going to share with you the complete timeline of their affair, the lies they told to cover it up, and the professional misconduct that should concern every parent who sends their children to our local university. I looked directly at Brewster, who was standing frozen near the coffee vendor, his face a mask of shock and growing rage. Dr. Brewster, Professor Brewster, I hope you're taking notes. This is what accountability looks like. And then I began to tell their story, with evidence, with audio clips, and with the kind of compelling narrative structure that held the crowd's complete attention. It was the best performance of my life. The crowd had grown substantially since I'd begun speaking. Word was spreading through the festival that something dramatic was happening at the open mic stage, and people were abandoning food trucks and craft booths to witness what was quickly becoming the most memorable moment in Autumn Heritage Festival history. I clicked to my next slide, a timeline showing the correlation between Mira's late work meetings and the GPS data from her car. As you can see, my wife claimed to be working late at the university on these 17 occasions over the past 2 months. The red dots show where her car actually was during those times, Dr. Brewster's apartment complex. A woman in the front row gasped audibly. I recognized her as Mrs. Patterson, whose daughter was a sophomore in Brewster's Victorian literature class. Now, some of you might be thinking this is just a private matter between a husband and wife. But when the affair involves a tenured professor and a university administrator, when it affects professional decisions and student resources, it becomes a community concern. I clicked to the next slide, a photograph I'd taken of Mira and Brewster entering the Marriott together, during what was supposed to be Mira's solo business trip to Boston. This conference was funded by taxpayer money through the university's professional development budget. Mira told me she was attending alone to represent the PR department. As you can see, she had company. The murmur from the crowd was growing louder. I could see people pointing at Brewster, who was still standing near the coffee vendor, looking like he wanted to disappear into the ground. But perhaps you'd prefer to hear their own words about their relationship and their opinion of the community they serve. I clicked to activate an audio file, the conversation I'd recorded in my living room the previous week. Brewster's voice came through the speakers clearly. Passive can be dangerous. Passive-aggressive men sometimes surprise you. Mira's response followed. Tanner's not dangerous. He's just disappointed. In his career, in our marriage, probably in himself. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. He won't fight it. He's too passive to make trouble. That's how he approaches everything. I paused the audio and looked out over the assembled faces. That was recorded 6 days ago, in my own living room, while they were discussing their future together and my presumed inability to defend myself. I could see Mira near the edge of the crowd now, tears streaming down her face, but I felt no sympathy. She'd made her choices with full knowledge of the consequences. Let's hear a bit more about their professional relationship. I played another clip, this one from their conversation in my bedroom. Brewster's voice. What we have isn't about power or position. It's about connection, about finding someone who understands your potential. Interesting perspective from a tenured professor discussing his relationship with a subordinate administrator, I said into the microphone. I'm sure the university's ethics committee will find Dr. Brewster's interpretation of appropriate workplace relationships fascinating. Several faculty members in the crowd were now looking distinctly uncomfortable. I recognized Dr. Walsh from the psychology department, Professor Martinez from the English department, and Dean Richardson, who had arrived just in time to hear his PR director and literature professor discuss their taxpayer-funded romantic getaway. Now, some of you might wonder why I'm sharing this information publicly instead of handling it through proper channels. The answer is simple. They made their relationship public. They attended university functions together, traveled together on official business, and conducted their affair openly enough that it became common knowledge among the faculty. I clicked to my final slide, a collage of photographs showing Mira and Brewster at various public locations over the past month. These photos were all taken in public spaces, showing public behavior: the restaurant, the parking lot outside his apartment, the hotel lobby in Boston. They weren't hiding their relationship. They were simply counting on everyone's discretion to protect them from consequences. I looked directly at Brewster again. Unfortunately for them, I'm a storyteller by profession, and this story deserved to be told. The crowd was completely engaged now, and I could see people recording my presentation on their phones. The story would be all over social media within hours. In conclusion, I want to thank my wife Mira for teaching me that marriage vows are apparently negotiable, and Professor Brewster for demonstrating that academic ethics are more flexible than I'd previously understood. Their relationship has been educational for everyone involved. I disconnected my laptop from the sound system and stepped away from the microphone. That concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to provide copies of all evidence to anyone interested, including university administrators, ethics committees, and local media. The crowd erupted in applause, shocked laughter, and animated conversation. I could see people immediately forming groups to discuss what they'd just witnessed, phones coming out to share the story with friends who'd missed the presentation. As I packed up my equipment, Dean Richardson approached the stage. His face was grim, but his tone was professional. Mr. Jossman, I need to speak with you about the allegations you've just made. They're not allegations, Dean Richardson. They're documented facts. I have audio recordings, photographic evidence, GPS data, and witness statements. Everything I've shared today can be independently verified. This is highly irregular. There are proper channels for reporting concerns about faculty conduct. I tried the proper channels, I lied smoothly. When that proved ineffective, I decided to take my concerns directly to the community that funds the university. The dean looked out over the crowd, where people were still discussing my presentation with obvious fascination and outrage. This is going to create serious problems for the university. No, Dean Richardson. Professor Brewster and my wife created serious problems for the university. I just documented them. Meanwhile, Brewster had finally worked up the courage to approach the stage. His face was flushed with anger, and his hands were shaking. "You have no right to destroy people's lives with your paranoid fantasies," he said loudly enough for nearby crowd members to hear. "Paranoid fantasies?" I replied, equally loud. "Would you like me to play the recording where you and my wife discuss your hotel room in Boston? Or perhaps the one where you critique my furniture while planning your future together?" Several people in the crowd laughed, and Brewster's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "This is harassment. I'm calling the police." "Please do," I said calmly. "I'm sure they'd be interested in hearing the evidence of your affair with a married subordinate. Public corruption, misuse of taxpayer funds, violation of university ethics policies. I'm sure they'll find it educational." Brewster stormed away, pulling out his phone and shoving through the crowd. I doubted he would actually call the police, but if he did, I was prepared with legal documentation of everything I'd presented. Mira had disappeared entirely. I assumed she was somewhere crying or calling Pam for emotional support, but I no longer cared about her emotional state. She'd made her choices with full awareness of their potential consequences. As I finished packing my equipment, Dylan appeared beside me with a huge grin. "That was the most brutal thing I've ever witnessed," he said. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." "How do you think it went?" "Tanner, you just ended 2 careers and a marriage in front of half the town. I'd say it went exactly as planned." We walked away from the stage together, leaving behind the crowd that was still buzzing with excitement and shock. I felt oddly peaceful, like I'd finally completed a project that had been weighing on me for months. "What happens now?" Dylan asked. "Now they deal with the consequences of their choices. Mira will probably file for divorce immediately, trying to minimize the damage to her reputation. Brewster will likely face an ethics investigation and possibly lose his tenure, and I'll start writing my next novel." "About what?" "About a man who discovers that revenge is just another word for justice, properly applied." As we reached my car, I looked back at the festival crowd one more time. People were still talking animatedly, sharing phone numbers and social media contacts, ensuring that the story would spread far beyond the boundaries of our small town. Mira and Brewster had underestimated me, had dismissed me as passive and conventional. They'd thought they could rewrite our story with themselves as the protagonists and me as a minor character to be written out when convenient. But every storyteller knows that the best narratives have consequences, that actions lead to reactions, and that the most satisfying endings are the ones where everyone gets exactly what they deserve. I drove home to my empty house, my writing cabin, and my laptop, ready to begin the next chapter of my life. Behind me, the Autumn Heritage Festival continued, but I knew that this year's event would be remembered for only one thing: the day Tanner Jossman told the truth about his wife and her lover and changed everything. The story spread faster than I'd anticipated. By Sunday evening, my phone was buzzing with calls from local reporters, university administrators, and people I hadn't spoken to in years who'd heard about the festival incident through social media. I let most of the calls go to voicemail, but I did answer when Dylan called around 8 o'clock. "You need to see the university's website," he said without preamble. I opened my laptop and navigated to the school's homepage. There, prominently displayed, was a statement from Dean Richardson. "The university is aware of serious allegations regarding faculty conduct that were made public at a community event this weekend. We take all concerns about professional ethics seriously and have initiated a formal investigation. Dr. Alan Brewster has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of this investigation. The university remains committed to maintaining the highest standards of professional conduct among all faculty and staff. They moved fast, I said. Keep reading. There's more. I scrolled down to find a second statement. Additionally, Ms. Mira Jossman has submitted her resignation from her position as Director of Public Relations, effective immediately. The university thanks Ms. Jossman for her service and wishes her well in her future endeavors. I stared at the screen, surprised by how quickly everything had collapsed. In less than 24 hours, both Mira and Brewster had lost their careers. "How do you feel?" Dylan asked. "Honestly, I'm not sure. I wanted consequences, but this feels almost too easy." "Too easy? Tanner, you just destroyed two people's professional lives." "They destroyed their own professional lives. I just made sure everyone knew about it." But as I hung up the phone, I wondered if Dylan was right. Had I gone too far? Had my desire for justice crossed the line into cruelty? The doubt lasted until Monday morning, when I found Mira sitting on my front porch. She looked terrible. Unwashed hair, wrinkled clothes, eyes red from crying. The confident, ambitious woman I'd married had been replaced by someone broken and desperate. "We need to talk," she said, as I approached the door. "I think we've said everything that needs to be said." "Please, Tanner, 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I unlocked the front door and let her follow me into the living room. She sat on the edge of our couch, her former couch, and looked around the room like she was seeing it for the first time. "You destroyed my life," she said quietly. "You destroyed your life. I just made sure everyone knew about it. That's not the same thing, and you know it. You could have handled this privately. We could have gotten divorced quietly, split our assets, moved on with our lives." "Like you handled your affair privately?" She flinched at the word affair, as if she still couldn't quite accept what she'd done. "What Alan and I have is real. It's not some sordid office romance. We love each other." "Then you should be happy. You're free to be together now publicly, without any professional complications." "He won't see me," she said, and her voice broke. "After what happened at the festival, after losing his job, he says he needs space to figure things out." I almost laughed. So Professor Brewster was brave enough to pursue a married woman, but not brave enough to face the consequences when he got caught. "It's not like that. He's just scared. His career, his reputation. His career and reputation should have been his concern before he decided to have an affair with a subordinate." Mira was crying now, and despite everything she'd done, I felt a flicker of sympathy. She'd gambled everything on a relationship with a man who'd abandoned her the moment things became difficult. "I know I hurt you," she said. "I know I made mistakes. But did you have to be so public about it? Did you have to humiliate me in front of the entire town?" "You humiliated yourself, Mira. You just did it gradually, over months, thinking no one would notice or care enough to hold you accountable." "So this is about accountability? Or is it about revenge? Maybe they're the same thing." She wiped her eyes and looked at me with something that might have been recognition. "I never really knew you, did I? I thought you were passive, predictable. I thought you'd just accept what happened and move on. You thought I was weak." "Yes," she said quietly. "I thought you were weak. And now? Now I think you're terrifying." We sat in silence for several minutes. Outside, I could hear Mrs. Halloway working in her garden, life continuing normally while my marriage officially ended in my living room. "What happens now?" Mira asked finally. "Now you file for divorce, we split our assets according to state law, and we both start over. Will you contest it?" "No. I want this over as much as you do." She nodded and stood to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back at me. "For what it's worth, I am sorry. Not for leaving. I think we both know this marriage was over. But for how I did it. You deserved better than lies and deception." "Yes," I said. "I did." After she left, I sat in my living room and tried to process what I was feeling. Relief, certainly. Satisfaction that justice had been served. But also a strange emptiness, as if the intensity of the past few weeks had been the only thing keeping me focused. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Jossman, this is Rebecca Martinez from Channel 8 News. I was wondering if you'd be willing to do an interview about the situation at the university." "I don't think so. We're putting together a story about ethics in higher education, and your case has raised some important questions about accountability and transparency." "I've said everything I need to say." "What about a statement? Just a few words about why you chose to make your concerns public?" I thought about it for a moment. The story was already out there, spreading through social media and local gossip. Maybe it would be better to control the narrative while I still could. "One statement," I said. "No follow-up questions." An hour later, Rebecca Martinez and a camera crew were set up in my living room. I'd changed into a clean shirt and tried to look like someone who'd made a rational decision rather than someone who'd orchestrated an elaborate revenge plot. "Why did you choose to make your concerns about Professor Brewster public?" she asked. I looked directly into the camera. "Because accountability matters. When public employees violate ethical standards, when they misuse taxpayer resources for personal gain, the community has a right to know. My wife and Professor Brewster made their relationship public through their actions. I simply provided context for those actions. Some people might say your methods were extreme. Some people might say that having an affair with a subordinate while using university resources is extreme. I documented facts and shared them with the community that funds the institution where these violations occurred. I'll let others judge whether that was appropriate. What's next for you?" "I'm a writer. I'll continue writing, and I'll continue believing that actions have consequences, that truth matters, and that people deserve to know when their trust has been violated." The interview aired that evening on the 6 o'clock news. I watched it once, decided I looked tired but credible, and then turned off the television. Over the next few days, the story continued to evolve. A local newspaper picked it up, then a regional paper, then a blog that specialized in academic scandals. Each retelling added new details, new speculation, new opinions about whether I'd been justified or vindictive. I stopped reading the coverage after the first week. The story was no longer mine to control, and I had more important things to focus on, like my writing. For the first time in months, I felt creatively energized. I had a story to tell, not the literal story of my marriage's collapse, but a fictional exploration of truth, consequences, and the price of betrayal. I started writing immediately, the words flowing faster than they had in years. 3 weeks after the festival, Dylan stopped by with a bottle of whiskey and an update on the local gossip. "Brewster's definitely losing his tenure," he reported as we sat on my back porch. "The ethics investigation found multiple violations, not just with Mira, but with other staff members over the years. Apparently your presentation encouraged some other people to come forward. And Mira? Word is she's moving back to her parents' house in Vermont. Can't find work anywhere in the state. Your story made sure of that." I felt a brief pang of guilt, but it passed quickly. Mira had made her choices with full knowledge that discovery was possible. The consequences were unfortunate, but entirely predictable. "Any regrets?" Dylan asked. I considered the question seriously. Had I gone too far? Had my desire for justice become something darker and more destructive? "No," I said finally. They gambled with other people's lives, mine, the universities, the students who trusted them. They lost. That's how gambling works. And you? How are you doing with all this?" "Better than I expected. The marriage was over anyway. Had been for months, maybe years. At least this way, it ended with a truth instead of more lies." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the trees behind my property. For the first time since discovering Mira's affair, I felt genuinely at peace. My phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. This is Alan Brewster. We need to talk. I showed the message to Dylan, who raised his eyebrows. You going to respond? What's left to say? Maybe he wants to apologize. Or maybe he wants to threaten me. I deleted the message without responding. Whatever Brewster wanted to discuss, I wasn't interested. Our story was over, the ending already written. But as I sat on my porch that evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that Brewster's message meant something more than a simple desire to talk. Some stories, I realized, have epilogues whether you want them or not. 6 months after the Autumn Heritage Festival, I was putting the finishing touches on my new novel when someone knocked on my door. Through the window, I could see a figure I didn't immediately recognize, a man in an expensive suit carrying a briefcase. I opened the door to find Alan Brewster looking like a shadow of his former self. The distinguished professor who'd stolen my wife had been replaced by someone hollow-eyed and desperate. "We need to talk," he said. "No, we don't." I started to close the door, but he put his hand against it. "Please, 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I let him into my living room. He sat on the edge of the couch where Mira had sat months earlier, in almost the same position, with the same desperate energy. "You destroyed my life," he said. "I documented your choices. You destroyed your own life. I lost everything, my job, my reputation, my pension, 20 years of academic work, gone. You should have thought about that before you decided to have an affair with a married subordinate." He laughed bitterly. "You think this was about power? About taking advantage?" Mira pursued me, Tanner. She made the first move, pushed for the relationship, planned our meetings. I was the one who wanted to keep things professional. And yet you didn't. No, I didn't. Because I fell in love with her. Because she made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. Because I thought we could build something real together. How did that work out? His face crumpled slightly. She won't return my calls, won't see me. The moment things got difficult, she disappeared. I felt a flicker of sympathy, but it passed quickly. Brewster had made his choices with full knowledge of the potential consequences. "What do you want from me, Alan?" "I want you to know that you didn't just expose an affair. You destroyed a love story. You took something beautiful and turned it into something sordid and shameful. I took something deceptive and made it honest. If your love story couldn't survive honesty, maybe it wasn't as beautiful as you thought." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with some internal decision. "You know what the worst part is?" he said finally. "I actually respect what you did. The planning, the patience, the execution, it was masterful. You played us perfectly. I didn't play anyone. I just paid attention. You're a better storyteller than I gave you credit for." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I am sorry. Not for loving her. I'll never be sorry for that. But for the way it happened. For the lies. For the hurt we caused you." "Thank you," I said, and meant it. After he left, I sat in my living room and thought about forgiveness, about justice, about the difference between revenge and accountability. I'd gotten everything I'd wanted, the truth exposed, consequences delivered, my own story reclaimed. But I'd also learned something about myself that I wasn't entirely comfortable with. I was capable of patience, planning, and calculated destruction. I was capable of orchestrating someone else's downfall with precision and creativity. I was, in short, exactly the kind of person I wrote about in my novels. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Dylan's name appeared on the screen. "You'll never guess who I just saw leaving your driveway," he said. "Alan Brewster." What did he want? To apologize, I think, or maybe to understand what happened to him. And I think he finally gets it. Actions have consequences. Stories have endings. Some people get what they deserve. Including you? I looked around my empty house, at the framed photos I'd taken down, at the space where Mira's belongings used to be. I thought about the novel I was writing, the peace I'd found in solitude, the satisfaction of knowing I'd stood up for myself when it mattered. Yeah, I said, including me. After hanging up, I returned to my writing cabin and opened my laptop. The novel was almost finished, a story about truth, consequences, and the price of betrayal. It was the best work I'd ever done, fueled by experience and refined by understanding. I typed the final sentence, saved the file, and leaned back in my chair. Outside, the Maine woods were quiet, except for the sound of wind through the trees and the distant call of birds settling in for the evening. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace with my life, my choices, and my story. Some endings, I realized, are exactly what they should be.